coming into podcasting was like, not only do I get the content that I'm working on is amazing. It's stuff I would listen to anyways if I was just a listener of a show. So not only do I have that experience as we're actually doing this work, but the clients that we meet and the relationships that we built. And I've gotten coaching from people that I would never really call a coach, but we've gotten on the phone and I'm struggling through this and they help me out. And then they send me referrals and then I'm getting assistance from them and I'm helping them build their show. And then now I have a mentor. I've never had that before. And it just kind of snowballed, kind of like the business itself did, but just getting these support structures in there that I didn't really plan for. It just kind of happened. And I think that's made a big difference rather than feeling kind of like isolated, like on my own, trying to build something.
Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that business inertia and propel you and your business forward. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Today's episode is a special one because it features the people behind the scenes of the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the founders of Create Media, the podcast production company formerly known as Podcast Masters. None of the entrepreneurs behind Create Media intended to be entrepreneurs. They were freelance writers, musicians, and music producers looking to use their skills and fulfill their passions. Along the way, a great company was built, and it continues to gain momentum as the podcast industry evolves. Cody Boyce, the founder of Create Media, turned to editing podcasts when his career in music hit a wall. As he built his company, he used social media to find Hayden Lee, a sound engineer and fellow musician, as well as Ben Gregson, a writer and editor. From one employee to a talented collective of passionate writers, audio engineers, designers, and composers, Create Media has now produced a broad range of shows across a variety of clients, from individuals wanting to share their own point of view to small businesses and up through Fortune 500 companies, and they're just getting started. In today's episode, Cody, Hayden, and Ben shared their entrepreneurial journeys, their challenges, lessons learned, and the fuel that keeps them going. Because in the end, it's a business built on their passions. We'll start with Cody.
Yeah, so I have a music background. I've been a musician for quite a while. And in undergrad, I studied audio production. So I was, in the studio. I wanted to be a record producer basically back then. So I was playing guitar and learning about Pro Tools and the studio and the recording and everything. And when I got out of school, I did that for quite a while. So I spent a couple years teaching lessons and taking gigs and trying to just basically make it work. I refused to move to New York or to Los Angeles. I stayed in Ohio and I was like, I'm going to make this happen from Ohio. I'm not leaving. And after a few years, it just ended up being, I felt like we were kind of banging our head against the wall. Like I was doing okay and I was getting by, but nothing was really taking off and it wasn't really being successful like I had hoped it was. So I was kind of at a point where I kind of wanted to walk away from it. And then podcasting popped up. I had a buddy that had been telling me for about a year that I need to listen to podcasts. And I had heard about it and I had the iPod and all that stuff. And I just refused to listen to anybody for a while. And then he finally grabbed my phone and started downloading episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience and was like, you have to listen to this. And then I started to, and I was hooked instantly. And I started listening to it. And then I found some freelance websites online. And I was like, I already have an audio background. So like editing podcasts would probably be way simpler than trying to produce like an entire record or an entire score for a video game or something. So I started taking freelance jobs. I listened to podcasts. I edited podcasts. I was basically living and breathing this whole industry. And it just kind of took me over. And freelance jobs picked up. Clients wanted to work with me. People sent referrals. I needed help, so I started building out a team, and it's been really just snowballing since then in about 2015.
Building a team is a challenge for any entrepreneur. And for Cody, he didn't have any formal business background that could help guide him. But he followed his gut, and he figured it out along the way. His first hire was Hayden Lee, a former musician from the UK, who also found his way into podcasting through music. Hayden's story might sound a little familiar because Cody and Hayden walked very similar paths.
I started playing guitar when I was 11 or so, and then, come to age 13, start messing around with the recording equipment, getting into recording bands, my own bands and others and stuff like that, getting into the music side of it, really. It's the way a lot of people come into the kind of technical audio side. And then from there, I went to university and did sound design, got the degree in that. And then the only reason I went to university really was because my friends were going, and I thought, well, I might as well. But then I didn't know that years down the line, like 10 years after, I would be using my degree. I never thought that would happen.
And what did you want to do after graduating? Did you have an idea?
Well, I didn't. So I graduated and then immediately joined a glam metal 1980s rock band, and then kind of toured the country a bit. And so, yeah, the thoughts of career weren't really there, shall we say.
So how did all of that, though, eventually lead you to finding podcasting?
I had gotten into travel by this point, and I remember I was in India, and I got dengue fever. I contracted dengue fever, and so I had to come back home, because what they refer to as a hospital, I disagree. And so I came back to England, and I had all these travel stories, and so I thought, no, let's tell people. I started telling people, and they said, well, we've heard this before. We've heard this so many times before. You need to stop telling us your stories. So I made a podcast about my travel stories. And about 6 months into that podcast, I started talking to people about podcasting. And this is what I've come to realize that kind of life is. It's all networking. And I talked to this person, that person. Then Cody came up. Cody came up saying, hey, we're looking for someone to deal with audio. And I thought, hold on. I love podcasting. I have a degree that I haven't used in 10 years in this. This is where my skills lie. Hold on. Is this what I'm meant to be doing? And that's how I ended up starting going into podcasting, really.
So when you came back from contracting dengue fever and we're back in the UK, you mentioned you had all these travel stories because I know you're an avid traveler. And people had mentioned to take your stories to a podcasting platform, essentially. And that's how your Travel Stories podcast got started. And that's what got you into the space to begin with. Is that right?
That's absolutely it. Yeah. Getting into the podcasting space was it was going through the initial door. And then through there, it was networking with this person and that person. And then eventually found my way across the corridor after this door to get to Cody.
Ben Gregson, Cody's third member, came from a different background entirely. He was a writer and a journalism student who always had a passion for stories and storytelling, but he wasn't sure what to do with it at first. Similar to the others, his career journey right out of school wasn't linear, and he used freelancing as a way to test and learn. Ultimately, he walked through a few quarters before he found the door that led to Cody and joining this company.
So I graduated college and had sort of originally gone for journalism, decided partway through I didn't really want to be a journalist, and segued sort of some of the things I was learning into just overall production, and was trying a little bit to try to do a sort of some internships is maybe a stretch of a word, but help some people launch podcasts in DC while I was there, which didn't have significantly positive results. But I sort of kept working in freelancing as I graduated. And realistically, I was willing to do more or less any freelance job that I had the skills to do at that point, which involved a lot of WordPress work and a little bit of podcasting work. But through one of the podcasts I was doing sort of everything on, I ended up finding a lot of the podcasting communities that are out there, some very active Facebook groups in particular, and started just sort of lurking in there. And occasionally people would ask for, if someone needed a writer or an editor. And I saw Cody, the founder of Podcast Masters, posting about needing an editor. And I applied, and I actually did really poorly on the assignment because it was for audio editing. And I can audio edit, but I would not call myself a professional audio editor. And I'm particularly not that great at the production end of it. I'm good at the editing, but not the mastering and stuff. and did really poorly. But then about a month later, so I'm looking for a writer, and I contacted him again, and I was like, "No, if you remember me, I'm actually a much better writer." And I don't think he did actually remember me, but and I think ultimately through that same original post, he found another one of our editors, Hayden, who's working here now. And so I came on as a writer. Yeah, slowly just sort of, he was sort of working with a bunch of freelancers at the time, and at a point where we hit a certain mass, and that was becoming sort of unsustainable, mostly just the logistics of it, having like 8 people doing on, like at that time, probably somewhere between 12 and 20 shows. We sort of pared down, and it was just the 3 of us for a while. And it's sort of kept going since then.
Cody was and still is focused on finding the best talent no matter where they are. And in this day and age, attracting great talent means offering a level of work-life flexibility and an alignment to a higher goal to potential employees. One in particular is location independence, as Hayden likes to call it. This modern way of working was never an inhibitor for Crate Media, yet it's still counter to how many businesses operate today. It's this expanded freedom in their approach to work, coupled with that sense of purpose and passion that's important to the team. It can all be done successfully, and all that just naturally aligns with the platform of podcasting.
For me, when I'm looking at roles and jobs and things like that, I have certain criteria that for me, I need to meet, And I mean, everyone has this criteria when they're looking for a job or something like that. I mean, pay is one, obviously good pay, maybe benefits if you're in the States, maybe proximity to somewhere else. These are the type of things we look for. For me, it is location independence is extremely high, if not top of that list. It's that thing of, I believe it's pronounced, I can't pronounce Japanese, but I believe it's ikigai. It's a big Venn diagram where you have your purpose, what you want to do, what you really enjoy, and then is good for the world? Is it overall net positive for the world? Is it beneficial? And then can it make you money? And there's a fourth one as well. And it's that type of thing. It needs to tick these boxes for me to be interested. And location independence is 100% actually at the top of those boxes. It really is.
And do you think this prioritization of location independence is something that is growing more and more pervasive with your generation?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, you can see it with the amount that people travel and the amount of people that do travel. I mean, I was going to say it's worldwide, but that's obvious, but it really is worldwide. There are people traveling all over the world. People are used to traveling now. Gap years used to be a thing that maybe one person out of 100 would take. Then it was 1 in 50. And now a lot of people I talk to, they're taking gap years before they go to college, before they go to university. They want to go out. They want to see the world. It's this want and this need for freedom, however you may define it. It's this want for freedom. And maybe it's a generational thing. I don't really class myself as a millennial, even though age-wise I am. Maybe it's a generational thing. But I think that it's only going to get more and more. I think with the advent of this technology, it was obvious that this was going to be the next step. It was obvious, and it still will. We're not there all the way yet. Going into an office and doing something, I think, will be in the minority in, 10, 20 years, something like that. That's just how I see it, man.
So you brought up a really interesting point about this need for freedom. Do you think this need for freedom also aligns to just the platform of podcasting too? Because podcasting does give somebody that freedom to express themselves probably in a more flexible way, an expansive way than some other mediums.
100%. 100%.
As the company was continually taking shape, Cody started learning that building a business takes more than operations and execution. It's about building a company culture from the beginning and establishing a working dynamic that sets the baseline as the company grows. And even without any formal business experience, he inherently knew that this was a driving factor in the ongoing success of the company. When he hired Hayden and Ben at first, he didn't realize it, but he was already forming his company culture. He had a methodology for hiring that many established organizations have taken years to adopt.
Our team is great. They they are hands-on working with all of our clients like on a day-to-day basis, and they're making everything run. They're making the shows happen. And I honestly don't know how I ended up with all these amazing people. But early on, like let's say I needed an audio engineer to help us with some of the editing. So based on how many shows I have, I would make up a post on a podcasting group on Facebook or on Fiverr or something, Fiverr or Upwork, and I would get maybe 4 or 5 engineers, and I would each give them one show at a time. And I would just give them just very small workloads with like not as pressing due dates. And we would do that for maybe a month and just kind of see how they operated. Because what I look for is people that are like, they feel fortunate that they get to work on podcasting, because it's a very interesting industry. And if you get to do that day in and day out and you are a podcaster, it's almost like a dream job. And that sounds kind of cheesy, but it really is. Like you get to live and breathe in the podcast space. So what I wanted to see was like people that are very enthusiastic, people that weren't scared to like speak up with ideas for how we could optimize things, bring new clients to the table, help our workflow and process and everything. So I would just have, a larger group of people in one department, I would say, and we would work and just I would gauge people and see how they're doing. And then after, a set amount of time, whoever was basically the best, I would say, I would just keep them, give them all the work. And then we would just part ways with the other people that we were testing out, I guess.
So you're sampling them, versus hiring them outright, which, the typical corporate approach, I think still these days, you write up a job rec, you put it out there, you do a lot of interviews. You don't really get a chance to try out that person to see if they, one, fit with the culture, but two, can do what you want them to do and can adapt in the way that certainly I think you need them to adapt. So it's a different mode of working or hiring, I should say.
Yeah. And when everything's contracted work, you have that opportunity, I feel, whereas I wasn't putting out a job position with a salary. I obviously couldn't do that if that was the case. It was more, if you were to work with a videographer, photographer, a similar thing, like I need you to do this job on a weekly basis. Here's the due date. And that's it. And if that goes well, I'll give you all the rest of our jobs as well. So we just kind of tested it out that way.
What was really interesting that you mentioned is you were searching for a certain quality and it wasn't skill set dependent. It was passion oriented. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that that is a critical thing that just drives the way your business operates today?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there's obviously some skill set that needs to be there. But it's way more important for me to have somebody that is in love with podcasting, is very positive, likes engaging with the team, is happy to, talk to clients and follow up on tasks and fix things, and just the enthusiasm and the positivity. Like if you're working with the best audio engineer in the world, but they're very pessimistic and they're always complaining about things, and they're like, it's just bad energy that you're bringing in. It's toxic and it doesn't help anything. So it's more about finding people that like have that initial skill set that's like enough that we can basically teach them anything they need to know to level up, but they have the enthusiasm and the positive energy that we want basically to keep the team afloat. And company culture is not something that I had heard when this was happening in the beginning. I mean, it was another year after this probably that I really heard that term and understood what it meant. But yeah, we were kind of just intrinsically, that was happening.
Even though Cody didn't realize it at the time, he had a gut feeling of the type of people that he needed and wanted to work with. And that wasn't dominated by hiring someone based on their direct skill sets. There were other important attributes, the softer skills, people skills, that were necessary to bring into the fold. And given where Cody was in the early stages of his business, the only way to hone in on those critical traits was to test folks out. In the process, Cody identified that hiring based on enthusiasm and aptitude for learning, coupled with a growth mindset and a client service mentality, created a foundation for how he could identify who he wanted to work with and who he didn't. This laid the groundwork for the culture Crate Media has today. And as Hayden will tell us, culture is still a huge part of the company and a contributing factor to its rapid growth.
For me, it comes down to the personal touch, personability, personality, things like this. Everything with the word person in it. Because, say, for example, you're hiring someone. On paper, fantastic. They could be absolutely fantastic, hitting all the right numbers, hitting everything you need. But if they don't have that personal touch, it's, for me, that's 50% of it, at least. One of the questions on our hiring form, if someone applies for a job with us, one of the questions is Star Wars or Star Trek. That's actually one of the questions on the form. And the reason is we don't want anyone that prefers Star Trek over Star Wars on our team. It's not going to work. And even though that sounds like a joke, there is a lot of truth behind that. There's a lot of truth behind that. You need to be able to get on with your team. You need to be able to be personable with your team. You know, it's, for me, that whole community aspect of it is such a big part. And if you overlook that, if you overlook the community aspect, I think everything else will fall one by one. Yes, you can run it just by the numbers, and you can make a profit and then turn that profit. You can do that. You can do that. But without the personal touch, without the communication between the teams, without that team mentality, without that, I don't think it's going to last long. I think when you think of business and collaboration with people on your team, I think that one big thing that a lot of people maybe overlook is the personal factor. It's when we're thinking about hiring someone, that is 50% of it is, are we going to enjoy working with them? That's 50% of it at least. And because these are people that, I talk to people in Create Media more than I talk to my family, you know? And so they need to be people that you believe in, that you trust, that they're your friends, you know? Or at least I think so. And so with that, when you're away from someone and maybe you haven't ever met them, it can be a little difficult. But with us, what we like to do is each year, wherever we are in the world, we will all come to one place and get together. I feel that thing once every year, that meeting, that really, at least for me, it tides me over until the next year. It makes sure that we have that personal touch, you know? For me, that's enough. For others, it may not be, but for me, that's enough.
You know, I find that so interesting that you brought it up, that having the opportunity to meet others on your team, and maybe it's just once a year or it's just seldom, versus many of us who are older and who grew up originally in an office environment where having that face-to-face was pretty critical and necessary to feel the connection. It certainly with the advent of technology and I think generational differences, that expectation and need is going away, or it doesn't feel like it's as critical to feel connected anymore in terms of needing to have the face-to-face.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's more of a product of maybe not the generation, but the time and the things we have available to us, video calls and instant messaging. Not that that's new, but instant messaging, it's instant. You can feel that connection and it goes beyond work for me. I talk to my family once every 6 months or something, you know, and it's maybe we're a weird family, but for me, it's enough because I know that they're always in my pocket. You know, everyone from Create Media is always in my pocket, 5 seconds away from having a conversation. Everyone's always there. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, but it's a thing nonetheless.
Tight communication has always been important to Create Media, as their virtual team is spread all around the world, and their client base is also geographically distributed. Establishing the right process and rhythm of communications is critical to their operations and fundamentally growth. Ben shares why communication is especially important for a group of people from non-corporate backgrounds who are all now client-facing.
I guess part of it, learning how to work with people, which might sound a little silly. I guess was fairly independent in most of the work I did up to now. And realistically, it was pretty independent even in my early years doing work out of college because it was all just freelancing stuff. So it was, having to sell myself was difficult. But once I got a job, it was just sort of learning what the job is, doing it, and delivering it. There's a lot more when you have sort of more regular clients or when you have coworkers and you have to actually communicate with them and do that in a way that makes things like more effective and not more complicated. Like that takes a lot of work, especially in the situation like ours where almost every client, every coworker is someone who you will quite possibly never meet in person. Even if you do, that is just going to be sort of at a conference or something like that, maybe, or going specifically to visit, being able to identify when you need to say, people need to talk to each other. Just communication is a huge part of it, particularly if you're working remotely. Not over communicating is also important. I find myself often doing writing maybe just a bit more that needs to be written to convey a point, and ultimately it getting more complicated. And like, I think a big part of our sort of transition is leaning more into, I'm not just producing a podcast, like a podcast very much being a pillar of what we're doing for people, but sort of expanding on that. And I think a lot of that involves talking to them, everyone more, clients, and having more deep conversations about their goals and their passions and why exactly a podcast felt like the right thing, and better being able to help people structure their podcast, or maybe just position their podcast in a way that directly supporting their passions and their goals and their brand is a lot of what we are sort of shifting towards. And a lot of that comes down to doing that communication better.
Ensuring cultural fit, tight collaboration, and that sense of connection among the team drives Crate Media's ability for unity, efficiency, productivity, and success. It's all important for any burgeoning business. Further, the client relationships they've formed have been pivotal in creating the ongoing momentum that has led them to where they are today. They've never been transactionally focused like so many other businesses. It's always been singularly focused on helping people build their stories, because the power of the podcast medium is this amazing intimacy that one can get with the host and their guests. Their value is helping to create that intimacy for their clients with their listeners. So for Crate Media, helping to shape and build their clients' unique and personal stories can only come from being client-focused. And as Cody learned, that has paid off in spades.
Coming into podcasting was like, not only do I get the content that I'm working on is amazing. It's stuff I would listen to anyways if I was just a listener of a show. So not only do I have that experience as we're actually doing this work, but the clients that we meet and the relationships that we built. And I've gotten coaching from people that I would never really call a coach, but we've gotten on the phone and I'm struggling through this and they help me out. And then they send me referrals and then I'm getting assistance from them and I'm helping them build their show. And then now I have a mentor. I've never had that before. And it just kind of snowballed, kind of like the business itself did, but just getting these support structures in there that I didn't really plan for. It just kind of happened. And I think that's made a big difference rather than feeling kind of like isolated, like on my own, trying to build something.
In terms of knowing how to best run and grow a business, Cody admits there initially wasn't a plan. In the formative stages, he ended up saying yes to everything. And given that they were also in an industry that was still nascent, there weren't many precedents set for how to run a podcast production company. So they've used experimentation to learn and create their processes, which Cody will tell us wasn't easy at first.
Yeah, I mean, we're more deliberate with things nowadays, obviously. But early on, yeah, there really was no plan. It was what I've been saying to myself is early on, you say yes to everything, and then as your company grows, you say no to everything gradually. And there's like the two lines kind of cross. So early on, we were saying yes to everything. I'm going to edit as much as I can. I need to build this. We need to, bring in money. And as far as building the business, it was really just, I have too much work and I need somebody else to help. So let's bring somebody on. Okay, you start working on this show. Okay, well, now I have to figure out how people work and how to explain jobs to people and how to write SOPs for everything, because no one is in my head understanding how things are operating. So I have to explain that. And that's very difficult to me, being an introvert. So it was like basically just putting out fires for the first 2 years. It was just kind of like throwing everything together, trying to hit deadlines whenever we could, and just keeping things afloat, really. And as that became more and more taxing, then I am trying to step back and like actually plan things and get ahead of the train instead of trying to just keep it on the tracks.
And what Cody learned from the early days in building his company completely changed his outlook on business entirely.
Don't be afraid to pivot. I think I had this idea in my head that music was what I set out to do and I had to do it. And when it felt wrong, I kept doing it anyways. And I think that you always need to trust your instincts. And when it seems like it's time to make a shift or make a pivot, don't be afraid to do that.
If there is one thing that you point out was the biggest learning in building this podcast business that you have, what would it be?
You don't get very far on your own. And I think attracting the right people, the right team members, the right coaches, the right friends, making sure you're surrounded by the right people and working with the right kind of clients, I think that is the fastest way to get where you're going.
Luckily, Cody chose great people to work with from the beginning who are dedicated to helping the business grow. And as Ben will tell us, this entrepreneurial path also wasn't something he ever planned for, but it's certainly been a fulfilling ride.
When I first started working with Cody, I definitely didn't think it was going to be more than just another one of my freelancing clients. It just sort of over the course of a year started to be taking enough of my time where it was pretty much my only freelancing client. And then like another year went by and it was more or less like, oh, I'm one of the 3 people like designing operations for a business. So it was not that intentional. So I don't think I ever thought about it that way.
What have you loved most about building the business?
I sort of touched on it earlier, but you do get attached to a thing that you grow. I mean, I like growing things in a garden as well, and it's a similar, if not slower, feeling of just being able to see a thing and look back and realize that you did something 2 years ago, and that you're still doing it, but it's better now. I guess it's just it is a nice and a fulfilling feeling that I don't think I would have chosen to start a business wholesale. And just be a startup founder. But it's very nice to sort of stumbled into being on a startup team and being sort of a operations and content person on that team.
Right. And you're shaping it. You're shaping it as you're doing it because you're part of an industry that's still nascent. So, you're ahead of the curve. And a lot of people still don't know.
Yeah, that's certainly a thing. It is interesting, even in the 3 years I've worked here, the difference in if someone asks you what I do and I say work with a podcast production company, how many people know what that means? And there are more, maybe somewhat biased by the locations I've been at various times, but it is interesting to see that it's growing, but it is still a lot of people who don't know what it is. That is probably the biggest challenge that the industry as a whole is facing at the moment, is how to grow the space as a whole.
For Hayden, much like the other two, learning to build a business has both been a struggle and a reward. But he's realized this freedom he's found in entrepreneurship allows them to be more authentic in their work, which ultimately enables them to drive meaningful relationships and better storytelling in the end.
I mean, I grew up working on building sites and stuff like this, and I'd never really seen that business structure, And so I remember last month or the other month or something, we were talking about C-level and like COO and all this stuff. I had to look them up. And I don't come from that business arena, but I think I like that, man. I like that about companies when they don't come from that arena. I really enjoy that because they have that. It's what we say about ourselves. We have that working class sensibility, That's what binds us together as a team. That's what binds us together with our clients. That's why I can talk to clients about their dogs and stuff like that, because it's that thing of if we're working with a company, the company may sell something. Who do they sell to? Primarily, potentially working class, middle class people, stuff like that. That's their target, right? That's their target market. And we know that target market because we are that target market. We are the working class. We are, some of us, the middle class, and that's how we know. We have that sensibility, and I love that. I love that. That's where we come from. When I remember when I was given the title executive producer, I looked it up, man. I didn't know what that meant. And we are learning as we go. And these things that we're learning, you stand on the shoulder of giants, don't you? You follow the footsteps, you find out what people have done, and you try to replicate that, but doing it your own way. That's what we try to do. And that is what we're doing. We're realizing these things that people have realized 100 years ago in their businesses. This is the entrepreneurial path. This is what it is. It's like we're thinking about, because me and Cody, we come from that, like I say, the engineer background, the working class. So we're thinking about, right, we need to do this work in order to do this on time and then do that. That's the way we're thinking. But then we realized that, hold on, this is us moving the legs, one in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. Yeah, we're keeping on going. But where are we going? We then realized, hold on, we don't just need legs, we need eyes, and we need a map. We need to know where we're going. And this is where the CEO stuff comes in. This is where the VP stuff comes in. And this is all stuff we're learning as we're going. It really is. And I tell you what, it's as rewarding as it is fun to go through it.
What do you think you've learned most in building a podcast business? Or really, even as a business in general?
I've learned that not that business is for everyone or entrepreneurialism is for everyone or anything like this, but I've learned that it doesn't have to be for a select few. Like I say, when you're growing up working class, when you're growing up in construction, you see people walking on the street with their suits and you think, that guy's different to me. He's in business. That's a different thing. But then when you get into business, the first thing you think is, hold on, I'm doing business. This is different to what I thought it was. And then hold on, I'm doing business. I'm the one doing it. I am one of those people now. I'm not an evil person, even though when I thought I would be when I was a kid. I've learned that prosperity isn't a bad thing. I've learned that financial gain isn't a bad thing. All of these things that I had to recondition myself out of from when I was a kid. I've learned all these things mostly about myself. And I've also learned that business is continually an uphill struggle, but struggle is not the right word because it's like hill running, you know? If you've ever gone hill running, while you're running the hill, it seems like a struggle, but you still go to that hill every single day and you do it because you know that it's worth it.
So when it comes to both growing podcasts and a business like Create Media's, it's about telling your authentic story. And that comes from pivoting and learning, seeing what fits, and building the right relationships because it's a journey. And you have to be passionate about that journey. It's not a one and done. Finding your niche takes time. You don't have all the answers, so you're evolving every step of the way as you figure out your culture, operations, people, and processes. Be open to what comes next, but never lose sight of the bigger picture. It's delivering value to who you're trying to service. Because in the end, you're helping them craft their story and yours from beginning to end. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. And thanks again to my guests from Create Media, Cody Boyce, Hayden Lee, and Ben Gregson. To connect with them, visit the show notes page for this episode on flywheelassociates.com to get their individual contact information. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a review. It's a small thing, but it can make a big difference. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.